Tako. Če nekega marčevskega deževnega večera, nedeljskega večera, popotnik zaide v klub Cankarjevega doma, pristane na Sjonu. Vabim vas, da se ogledate njegov bio v programski knjižici, medtem ko jaz odredram v angleščini za vse naše neslovensko govoreče goste. Pa bom izmenično med angleščino in slovenščino na začetku. So this is about you. You probably know a lot about this. And it goes something like this. So, born in Reykjavik in 1962, Sjón is a celebrated Icelandic novelist. He won the Nordic Council Literary Prize for his novel The Blue Fox, the Nordic country's equivalent of the Man Booker Prize, and the novel From the Mouth of the Whale was shortlisted for both the International Impact Dublin Literary Award and the Independent Foreign Fiction Prize. His latest novel, Moonstone, The Boy Who Never was awarded the 2013 Icelandic Literary Prize. Also a poet, librettist and lyricist, he has published 9 poetry collections, written 4 opera librettos and lyrics for various artists. And here comes the known part. In 2001, he was nominated for an Oscar for his lyrics in the film Dancer in the Dark, in collaboration with Lars von Trier, you know Lars, and of course. Sjón is the president of the Icelandic Pen Center and former chairman of the board of Reykjavik, UNESCO City of Literature. His novels have been published in 35 languages, Slovenian, hopefully not the last, nor the least. I'll switch to Slovenian now. So now you can rest a little bit. Začnimo z prvim romanom Modra lisica. Za pokušino gre nekako takole. Poči strel. Čudoviti mir divjine odpihne kakor košček papirja. Iz cevi se vsuje ploha iskr. Smodniški odmev kriči: Čujte moža! Lisico z bridkim cviležem vrže v zrak. In zdaj ti zaskalja. Leto 1883 častiti Baldur Skugason se poda v lov na lisico. Islandska zima, mrzje, sneži, grozijo plazovi. A mož vztraja. Človek je z lovom v mislih. Predtem Friedrich B. Fridjonsson, zeliščar, kmet iz Breke ali mož, ki mu pripada Ava, zlorabljeno dekle z Downovim sindromom, ki jo je pred leti rešil. Njihova življenja so usodno prepletena in temne skrivnosti bodo naposled prišle na plan. Rahločuten in dramatičen tablo divjega v naravi in človeku. Novela je prejela prav prej omenjeno Nordic Council Literary Prize, bila v ožjem izboru za Independent Foreign Fiction Prize in Jan Michalski Prize, prevedena v 31 jezikov. I don't care about spoilers, so I'll just cut to the chase. Ava, the abused girl with the Down syndrome, turns out to be the Reverend's daughter.
Okay.
Right. So, for me, a classical topic of, a dark secret hidden under a carpet and then coming out. Set in 1883, of course, the typical time when society was obsessed with its morals. I'm wondering, is this sort of were you after well, not Ibsenian, but like kind of a typical Nordic Scandinavian, let's bring the skeletons out of the closet, let's face the facts as they were back when morality was an issue?
Well, thank you for hosting me. Ljubljana. I'm very happy to be with you all and to be a guest of the fabulous FABULA. And thank you for taking care of me tonight and spoiling the books. I have never seen this as a morality tale. In Icelandic literature, there is a long tradition of priests being the bad guys. So if a priest appears in a novel, you know you have the bad guy. And that's why nothing about him and his behavior should shock you. And it was almost as a rule of thumb that priests through Icelandic history had illegitimate children all around and all sorts of things. So that is for me not the big thing. For me the relationship between the Reverend Baldur, who is this lowly priest serving in a remote valley in the north of Iceland, where he more or less lords over his congregation. At the same time, he is obsessed with fox hunting. For me, his relationship with the young woman, with the girl Abba, has more to do with the contrast between his supposed role as a man of God and a man who spreads the good word of Christ. Like I say, as a man of charity and all the good things he should be spreading, who really turns out to be a wolf in priest's flesh. So for me, it was more about that, and I reversed the roles of good and evil and good guy, bad guy in the book when I brought in Friðrik B. Friðjónsson, this young man who has studied in Copenhagen. He's been a dandy. He's been taking opium, reading French poetry, even drinking tea. When he returns to the country, he is the one that somehow has picked up information that makes it possible for him to be the agent of charity and kindness.
In an interview, you talk about the role of the church as an institution for social cohesion, right? In Iceland, especially in that time. I mean, we were talking about seriously poor period, where people are really living on minimum. So how does that social cohesion go with the Reverend being so keen on fox hunting to earn a little extra penny, while not wanting to bury his own daughter?
Well, we have gone through changes in Iceland with the church. So I think I must have been, in that interview, referring to the Catholic Church. So before the Reformation, the Catholic Church served as a social security network for the poor in Iceland. After the Reformation, the Protestant Church, on one hand became very draconian and really cracked down on all folklore, all folk wisdom, all folk medicine, and for the first time we saw the burning of people for witchcraft. And on the other hand, they relieved the rich of Iceland of the burden to share their wealth. And they just, became a quite, let's say, evil institution in many ways. It was only in the late 18th century that the Icelandic Church started getting a little bit better and became a part of the Enlightenment process. So, in this case, you have a small congregation out in the remotest valley, and bad things happen there. I'm not saying the whole of Church of Iceland was behaved as Baldur, but there was a break of trust between the population and the church after the Reformation. One thing that happened was that Obviously, most of the Catholic priests and monks and the servants of the Catholic Church who were there, they left or they took off their habit, you know. So there was a shortage of priests in Iceland. And almost any idiot could become a priest if he was willing to put on the habit. And that is the origin of our great gallery of idiot priests and really bad people serving in that position.
So, are you saying that, in essence, it's not that difficult to sort of do a critique of the double standards of, say, bourgeois or church morality in your works, because they're already kind of embedded in the minds of the people as, you know, these dual figures, like.
You know, what I think was the surprise for people about this book was the revelation of how handicapped and mentally handicapped people, how they were treated, how cruelly they were treated. Because we usually in school are only shown the great things about the second half of the 19th century. It's the time when the Romantic poets stepped forward and taught us how to love our country through poetry. It's the first steps towards independence. So learned Icelanders in Copenhagen started like working towards first our sovereignty and then our independence. So we had only been told like the good things, you know, but the systematic cruelty in the remote places was something, of course, we knew about, but because we had been a colony of Denmark until 1944, the Danes were always blamed for anything that went wrong in Iceland. So if a person was punished for stealing a piece of rope, you know, you were flogged for stealing a piece of rope. It's the Danish, you know. When somebody hit someone, oh, it was because he was frustrated because of the Danish, you know. So we have a long history of blaming everything on the Danes and not seeing that it was our own people who were doing most of the cruelty.
I mean, what I really like is that, you know, like you say, you play between the good and bad in characters, but on a different level in society that, you know, spontaneously no one really questions, is where the beast comes out. And that's the treatment of, say, kids with Down syndrome. So phrenology before eugenics, you know, they look different. Of course, they're not going to develop into like respectable citizens and so on. Just, you know, don't let them breathe. Do away with the body as elegantly as possible, and that's it. And this, precisely this, business as usual, is, I think, where, like you said, you know, it touches most.
Yes. This book was a strange process for me because I really didn't know I was going to write it. It's usually like that with my books. I had started like reading up on fox hunters while I was writing another book. I started looking for stories about like the real man, the real Icelander, the masculine man who like faces the storms and climbs mountains and swims rivers and all that. And the best stories I could find were the stories of the Icelandic fox hunters. The fox is actually the biggest native land mammal in Iceland. The other native land mammal in Iceland is the field mouse. So this is for your information about what you should expect to attack you when you get there. So when the settlement started in the 9th century, they had to fight foxes and field mice. And throughout the centuries, the fox became like the enemy of man. And it's really it's really a vilified creature. I think we have up to 30-40 names for the fox, and they are of course all very, very negative. It's like bloodsucker, blood gums, blood pores. It's all about like how this creature preys on the livestock, of course, the sheep. So it's a great tradition of going out there and killing as much foxes as possible, because otherwise, and they did the calculation very early on, a pair of foxes has 6 cubs. Those 6 cubs have 6 cubs, and those 6 cubs have 6 cubs, and they just sat there, and they could just imagine how the valley would be flooded with foxes, like an avalanche of foxes if they didn't do anything about it. So I started reading up on these people, throughout history. And actually modern day fox hunters are as eager to kill as much as possible and have all the former ideas about this creature instilled in their minds. And so this animal, which is the size of a small dog, is really the demon that they have to conquer by going into the mountains. And I read an anthropological study on these fox hunters, and there I discovered to what extent they go, both to kill the animals and to protect themselves from the evil influence of the animal, because the fox has an uncanny ability to penetrate your mind. It's a telepathic animal. So if you're out there in the snow with a fox, beware. The next thing is that you might be turning the gun on yourself. That's how cunning it is. So I started reading up on these people, and I wrote the first part of the book, which is the fox hunt. At that time, I was just enjoying creating like this crazy chase in the mountains. But at the end of the last chapter, I wrote, "And the man pulls the trigger." Then I left the chapter alone for a few months. I came back to it, read it again. The man pulled the trigger, and instantly I thought, oh, he's got to have a name. And this name, Baldur Skuggason, came to my mind. And I thought, Baldur Skuggason pulled the trigger. I looked at the sentence, and it said, Reverend Baldur Skuggason pulled the trigger. And I thought, oh my God, he's a priest. This is a character, there is a story. And then I got like an image of this remote valley, and I knew what a tyrant he was, and I knew I had to find somebody to oppose him. And that became the dandy, botanist, opium smoking, poetry reading, Fredrik.
Did I get this correct, that the Skuggabaldur means the blue fox?
Yes.
So he basically is...
There is a folkloric,
hunting.
there's a folkloric creature called Skuggabaldur. So Baldur Skuggason is a play on the name of this creature. So an Icelander immediately knows that this is not only the bad guy, there is something even stranger going on, because Skuggabaldur is an animal that is the offspring of a cat and a female fox. So it's a hybrid that is born out in the wild, but because of its appearance, it crosses the borders into human habitat. So it's really like a fox in disguise. And we are very much afraid of them, because they are trying to put end to civilization as it is known in Iceland. Yes.
When you're talking about the fox now, am I correct in assuming, or I heard that the fox in Lars von Trier's Antichrist is no coincidence, and obviously culturally now, as you've explained, but it's also, the fox, your fox.
Well, I don't know. The only thing I know is that shortly before Lars wrote his script, he read a book by me, which has a talking fox. So maybe my my talking fox found its way into his film. I don't know, it looks like that. I have never spoken to him about it, and I'm not going to do it. You know, if he feels okay with it, okay.
And of course the fox says chaos reigns, so...
the fox
says chaos reigns.
Yes,
so
yeah.
Fitting again.
So, yeah, but the fox is a wonderful creature. It really, you know, was put on earth to put man to test, so.
The beastly cultured person and the cultural beast, right? There we go. But the excerpt where you talk about the Down syndrome, like it's so obvious that you really go to great lengths to research all of this. I mean, all of this is a great portrait of an era as well. Like, not just symbolism, but like hardcore, factual stuff. Historians are going to praise this, right? So while you research, you sort of compose the story as well. It sort of fits in together. You're doing little bits and pieces, bits and bobs, and then put them in a stew, and then you sort of piece them together to make a nice.
Yes, I do quite a lot of research for the novels. This one takes place in the second half of the 19th century. The one on the other side of the book, the boy who never was, takes place at the beginning of the 19th century. The 20th century, just 2 decades after the 19th century events of the other one. And I'm doing research all the time. Of course, I do specific research for the books when I realize that, okay, I'm going to write a book about that specific period, and I approximately know where the story is going. When I start accumulating material on that, I hang out in the National Library and the City Library, and of course, on the great internet. But it also springs from things that just come my way. So, for example, in the Blue Fox, there is a dictionary or list of words used by Abba, the young woman with Down syndrome, words from her own language. And this is based on a list that I discovered many, many years ago. A list that was written by someone in Iceland around the middle of the 19th century. And it was sent to a scholar in Copenhagen, exactly like it is in the book. And it's a fascinating list of words from a personal language. And because of my roots, you know, with the avant-garde, you know, my interest in data and surrealism, of course I became excited about this list of a made-up language that looks like something from Kurt Schwitters or Hugo Ball. So I had put this aside, and I had this in my drawer for years and years and years. I never knew what I was going to do with it, until I was writing this book, and I realized, okay, this will be the language of Abba. So I'm always hoarding, I'm always collecting stuff. I'm like a magpie. I fly around, I see something that glitters, I bring it back to my nest. And sometimes, like I said, I do not have a clue why it interests me. But this is what I've discovered as a writer over the last 30 years, that whenever something interests me, I just start collecting it. So, for example, at the moment, I'm, for some reason, interested in the gorilla man of Hollywood, the man who were inside the gorilla suits in the first Tarzan films and the first jungle films. This was a specific job in Hollywood. There were actors specializing in dressing up as gorillas and attacking scantily clad women and fighting with muscular white guys who were saving the women. For some reason, I'm very interested in these people. And I just collect whenever I see something, information about the biography of some of them, or if I find a new photograph I haven't seen. So maybe one day, one of my characters will find himself in a gorilla suit, in the middle of a fight. So this is how I work. And with a book like this, I just immerse myself in information from the 19th century, and it just keeps feeding me. Great stories, great events, and then I start like stitching it together. So this book, for example, I would say this book is 80% based on real documents that are rewritten, sewed together, and put into the context of the book.
But then reworked with a lyrical note. You are a lyricist.
I rewrite the whole thing so it becomes this book.
Would you say that trying to do scenes rather than the big narrative goes against, say, the predominant saga mode?
Well, one of the things the sagas taught me was that you stage things, actually. In the sagas, you never get any information about the characters, but through action and words. You never enter the minds of the characters. There are never speculations. These are just people who do things and say things. Okay?
Slowly.
Yeah, so on that side they are very realist narratives. But then the saga writers also have other literary tools at their service. So in a good Icelandic saga, you have this narrative of legal disputes and people like waging like battles against each other, killing each other's slaves because of something and other, and then going to the parliament and arguing that they should like be rewarded or they should be compensated, and they have a price list. If you cut off an arm, that means this much. And so he also cut off his head. Okay, so they have a price list for injuries and things like that. If you were on, if you did harm with bad intent, you had to pay, and you had to pay according to the price list. So you have all these things in the sagas, but these legal disputes and realist narratives. But at the same time, they always bring in dreams. So people dream, people tell each other their dreams, and those dreams always come true or contribute very strongly to the event. Somebody dreams 3 horses, 2 white, 1 black. Okay, so we will not send this guy with those 2 to meet these people because he's going to betray us. It's obvious. This is what dreams are for. And then people tend to compose poetry, even at the moment of death. You compose a poem if you're a poet in Iceland of the medieval times. So they have the realist fiction, realist narration. They have the dreams. They have the poetry, and the poetry is full of very intricate, special metaphors called kenningar, which Borges, for example, was occupied with. And those metaphors, they bring together the world of man and gods. And on top of this, you have the occasional vision. Writers writing through the sky with blood raining from their hoofs. And this is what we call realist narrative in Icelandic literature. And I have learned very much from that. So in all of my books, I try to present reality on all its levels, And by staging, I do not have to moralize. By staging and putting together a sequence of events, I give the reader the space to contemplate and co-create the story with me. Mm-hmm. I always say, it's hard to write the story, it's hard to write the book, it should be hard for the reader to put it together.
You say that the rhythm itself, because you compose librettos as well, and
the text is lyrical. I cannot but write rather lyrical
the economy
text.
is also due to rhythm.
Yes, I trained as a poet, as you can say. I started as a poet. My the first 7 years of my writing life, was writing poems. And I think in poetry you learn how to condense things, to boil things down, and And that is what I bring to the stories and bring to the books. And that's why they are small. But they're like, I always say that they are like, you imagine you can take a whole bull and you can boil it down to a little cube. So those are whole elephants, whole whales of stories that have been boiled down. And I hand them to the reader, and the reader gets as nourished as if he or she had eaten a whale.
Now, a confession. As I was reading this, he goes after the fox, and then he comes to fox, and there's a lot of pain all around while he's doing that. I must say, probably because of because the Oscars were, just a while ago. I kept seeing The Revenant in Inarritu's film The Revenant with Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yes.
And would you see this in a film as well, like The Blue Fox? Well, your take on, man versus nature.
Well, if DiCaprio is ready to repeat his role of Man in the Mountains, I would say yes. But normally, I'm quite wary of people coming to me saying, "Oh, we would like to buy the film rights to your book," So up till now, I always just said no, because for me the book is perfect as it is, and it is somehow tied in with let's say, the original way of telling stories. So, yet I haven't seen any proposals that have appealed to me. But the Blue Fox was actually on stage in Prague just a week ago, and that was fascinating, because for me the theater is so close to you. It's such an original narrative platform. So it was much more interesting for me to see this done on stage than it would be to see it in a film. And the transformation of man into fox on stage in Prague was just unbelievable. I really hadn't even thought that they had to deal with those things, because I thought the book is the book, It was difficult to write that scene, but I managed, But for somebody to actually go on stage and do it in front of people and having us believe that this was actually happening, that is magic. It's easy in film. On stage, it's magic, so, yeah.
Now, if Lars were to approach you,
yeah, because he's good at talking foxes, you mean? Yeah, maybe I would say, yes, Lars, you're already, good at talking foxes. Yeah, you can do this one too. Yeah.
Okay. Moving on, da nam ne zmanjka časa za drugi roman. Fant, ki ga ni bilo. Za pokušino, ključni moment, ampak tokrat ne bom razkril, za kateri moment gre. Kaj za ena svinarija pa je to? Te besede so podkrepljene z udarcem stisnjene pesti, ki fanta odre na tla. In zdaj deskalja. Leto 1918, v ozadju nebo, ki ga žareče razsvetljujejo vulkanski plameni Katle. Kljub grozeči naravni katastrofi, pomanjkanju premoga in divjanju svetovne vojne, življenje na ulicah Reykjavika teče kot ponavadi. Tam si 16-letni Manstein ogleda vsak nemi film, ki pride v mesto. Večkrat. Po noči premikajoče slike vpleta v svoje sanje. Po dnevi živi na robu družbe in opreza za solo G. Potem izbruhne še španska gripa. Nad prebivalce mesta se zgrnejo temne sence. Mani pa ostaja ujet med imaginarnim svetom filma in kruto resničnostjo družbe, ki ga odločno zavrača. To je zgodba o Islandiji v času globoke preobrazbe, zgodba o izobčencu v času, ko se življenje in smrt, resničnost in domišljija, skrivnosti in razodetja borijo za prevlado. Novela je prejela nagrade Icelandic Literary Prize, Divi Cultural Prize for Literature Icelandic Booksellers Prize in je prevedena v 15 jezikov. The very beginning of your novel, you know,
you cannot give that away.
No.
There has to be a surprise for people. The first 3 pages, let's leave them out of it, and then just say that people will be surprised, or they will be.
It's a good teaser, yeah.
Yes.
It's a good intro. I was trying to be filmic it. Okay. There's nothing in the first scene that, you know, discloses anything, and it's nothing in the scene that I began with that sort of takes away. So, you know, readers, come on. Good. So 1918, we have a World War I going on that hasn't even touched Iceland, and in another interview, you said, well, finally, the Spanish flu came in, so, you know, a big event for Reykjavik with about 15,000 people. You know, something's happening, there's thousands dying very quickly. So history sort of walks into Iceland, in a way. But much about this history goes parallel with a different kind of history, or like another kind of history, the LGBT history, of which you said that there's like little account like about that period. Was your novel received as a kind of a, you know, like a herald of this topic? I was trying to get the background of this, but as I don't read Icelandic, I wasn't able to decipher. But so, has the LGBT community accepted it as a sort of a, you know, like a signal, as a sign of the 1918s?
Well, in 1918, yes, the First World War was going on. Iceland was more or less unaffected by the war, apart from the shortage of goods, coal, for example. But what people in Reykjavik thought was even worse, there was a shortage of coffee, because that is the national drink in Iceland. So, then things start happening. You get the volcanic eruption, I think you mentioned. So ash starts raining over Reykjavik, and then the Spanish flu comes to Reykjavik. But at the same time, there were negotiations with Denmark about Iceland becoming a sovereign country. And it had been decided that the celebration for that should be on the 1st of December. Nobody knew that at the beginning of November, this epidemic would come ashore and completely ruin this little town.
The Danes again.
Yes, well, it was actually a ship from Denmark that brought the Spanish flu. So what I wanted to do was to put into this grand, amazing narrative, which surprisingly no author had used since 1919, and was therefore, you know, available to me as the setting for a story. What I did was that I started looking for a character that somehow would be completely out of place in Icelandic history, would somehow definitely not be a character you would associate with those times, and especially the moment of sovereignty. So I had, you know, the main threats, you know, the Spanish flu and the fact that we became a sovereign country at the end of the Spanish flu. And I started looking for a character, like I say, that somehow would take us into this world on a completely different premise than any character we had ever seen in Icelandic literature. And I had also, you know, so it was all again built on strange research, compulsive research. I didn't know where it was going, so I had like full folders of information about the Spanish flu, which surprisingly no one had written about. and I had information about the social situation in Reykjavik around that time. So I thought I will do something with this. My first idea was to bring into the situation a character that would be detached from the horrors of the flu in some way. This is a known trick in literature. If you write about the Spanish Civil War, you have an ambulance driver, you know, and people like that. You have nurses and doctors, people who are somehow observers. Because if you go into the tragedy of the families that are dying, it's overwhelming for the character. And because, you know, I like, yes, well, what do I do it? Well, that's just the way my mind works, but I somehow very soon got the idea that one of the things this character should be doing was a thing that nobody should do in the days of epidemic. And that is, this character should be having sex with strangers. Okay? Physical contact in an epidemic is of course something that you try to stay away from. And in the beginning I thought, okay, what kind of a character would be having sex, you know, going around? I also needed someone who was going around more or less unnoticed. And a teenager was perfect. Teenager was perfect like a drifter in this small town. Not only because a teenager can go out unnoticed, nobody's paying him any attention, but also because teenagers are wonderful in the way that they don't care about the big things that are going on, you know. No teenager in Iceland was interested in the fact that we were becoming a sovereign country. That was just something that middle-aged guys in suits were talking about, you know. So he's not interested in the historical events at all. So I thought, okay, he's having sex. Maybe he's like a teenage Don Juan going around the town, sleeping with the women of Reykjavik, and I can show like the different layers of society through this kid. But come on, what women would have been having sex with this 16-year-old street kid? I don't know. And I didn't want to find out because I was writing a book by an Indian author, which Neil Mukherjee, which did a very interesting trick with his character in the book, a character that turns out to be gay. I just realized that my character was queer or gay. So all of a sudden, I had completely pushed him to the margins of society. And he became an orphan, he was dyslexic, he was unemployed, and he was sleeping with a man of Reykjavik. So absolutely a creature of the night and the shadows. So this was my character, and he's a very lovely guy, he's a lovely kid. And what happened in Iceland was actually that the LGBT community embraced him and said, at last, there is a character like us in Icelandic literature. And
we were there when the independence happened.
We were there, you know, nobody knew that we were there. So it was like the hidden history. And then a strange thing started happening. I sincerely believed that this would be a book that would only appeal to what I hoped I had, a hardcore reader group. You know, a small group of Icelanders who try to read everything I write. I don't know if they're there, but I have to imagine that they're there. So I thought, you know, maybe this book will go somewhere and somebody will come and say, nice job, Sjón, you know. But what happened was that in the weeks following the publication of the book, people started stopping me in the street and in the supermarket and wherever, you know, they could get hold of me, telling me how much they loved the book and how much they cared for the kid. And the biggest group of carers for this character were elderly ladies. And that was the big surprise for me. So the book completely broke out of this fence, you know, being like a book about, you know, queer people or whatever. I mean, people just saw it as a book about a kid, maybe not so likable kid, but a kid that sticks with himself and survives through those days of the plague. But I haven't mentioned the fourth thread in the book, which is silent cinema, because I thought, okay, I can't take away his family, take away his ability to read. I can't just make him like a teenage prostitute without having any fun in the life. So I remember that I had like a whole dossier of information on the first years of cinema in Reykjavik. Because Reykjavik, the people of Reykjavik, the working class of Reykjavik and the kids of Reykjavik embraced cinema very early on. Right from 1913, when you have the first feature films, the people of Reykjavik, especially the working class and the kids, started going to the cinema. So I thought, he's obsessed with the cinema. And he's going to the cinema every day. And he's learning so much through the cinema, and the cinema becomes a window into the big world, and that is a part of the book. This, do we need this? Okay.
I was wondering, do we?
It works.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
But it's no coincidence that, you know, precisely that cinema introduced the vamp. So what is it about gay obsessions with the female vamp?
I don't know. I'm not gay, but I think
You're
all
a good researcher. So.
yes, but I think all teenagers are occupied with idols, you know, and it doesn't matter what your sexuality is. You become obsessed with someone, you know. In my case, I became obsessed with David Bowie when I was 12 or 13, and I was absolutely obsessed with him. I wallpapered my room with this guy, and of course, you know, read everything I could about him, listened to the music day in, day out. I completely idolized him. And in the book, something similar happens to Mánisteinn as what happened to me. Mánisteinn is obsessed with French films, a French film series called Les Vampires, and in the series there is this amazing woman who dresses like a shadow in a very tight black dress, and climbs roofs and kills people left and right, and he just loves her. She speaks to him. So when he discovers that in Reykjavik there is a young woman, a girl his age, who looks exactly the same, you know, he idolizes her, because her presence makes the real actress somehow present. And I say this is something that I experienced, because I remember when I was probably 13, when somebody said, do you know, there's a guy who's working in the record shop, Fakko on Laugavegur, who looks exactly like David Bowie. So I and two of my friends, who were also Bowie fans, we took the bus, 20 minutes ride, down to the center of town, just to look at him. And it was true, he looked a little bit like David Bowie. And just by this guy being there, David Bowie was a little bit in Reykjavik, you know. So Mánisteinn is in love with her, you know, and sees the vamp, this dangerous woman, which Irma Vep is in the film, is of course something that is transgressive, you know. There are no real borders anymore. David Bowie had it in his days of androgynous, being this androgynous person. Musidora or Irma Vep has it in her black suit. You know, where do you place her? You know, she's definitely a creature of the night. Yeah.
Would you say that the vamp and David Bowie are different names for emancipation? Let's bring in that word.
Yes, yes. And like I say, it's he was very interesting, and we have heard all those stories in the last few weeks after his death. He really had a great impact all over the world, in tiniest places. Somehow, just being as strange as he was, he gave us all license to do whatever we wanted and to be the people we wanted to be. And on top of that, he was a great educator, because he dropped in every interview, he dropped names of films, musicians, writers. So when I was 13, 14, I just took this as a shopping list, you know. I worked in the gardens of the National Hospital, so I usually had some pocket money, and I spent it on the things David Bowie told me to spend it on. So Magne Steinn is the same. He's infatuated with this wonderful young woman, Sola G, and he follows her like around, and he wants to be a little bit like her, but mostly he wants to be near her.
Would you say that being a teen, but in a way sort of not caring or not being aware of what society might, how society might castrate you for beating around the bush without beating around the bush?
Yes, Magne Steinn, he doesn't think about what he is or who he is, he just is. And that is something that I'm interested in working with. Like Abba in the Blue Fox, she is what she is. She is born with Down syndrome. Just by coming into this world, she forces everyone to take a stance, either by being humane or cruel. Magne Steinn is what he is. He comes into this world and he's just navigating in the Reykjavik of 1918, in the days of the Spanish flu, and he's just being what he is. And that's why he calls forth, this picture of society. But because the Spanish flu comes, he's selling his body to strangers, he's going to the cinema, and both of these things change when the Spanish flu comes. The cinemas were blamed for spreading the Spanish flu because people met in the cinemas and got infected by the flu there, so they closed down the cinemas. They did not close down the churches, and they did not close down the city theater, because those were places where respectable, clean people went, but the cinemas were places for the poor and dirty. So there was an interesting, interesting politics at work there. So the cinemas closed, and all of a sudden he's pushed outside the row and more towards the center of society, and he becomes a helper to one of the doctors who's going around helping the sick.
It's very interesting to read how I assume again this has been taken from factual sources. These were documents.
I would never admit that they were not.
How science, medical science in this case, right, justified or sort of argued in favor again of a completely moral issue, which is watch films, watch bodies equals perversion. And in all that darkness, in that room, strange things are going on.
Yes, some man of science realized how dangerous cinema really is. Yeah, they did. Yeah.
Again, trying to not disclose too much, sorry, because it's so juicy. All these factual elements plus the story development, it's so juicy that I'm just trying to, not spoil it for you people. Yeah. Okay. Would you say that the outcast, it takes one to know one? I like that expression. So in your novels, the outcast sort of always smells, recognizes, sucks even the outcast. They sort of combine together, and you always sort of feel this emancipatory potential, so to speak, right? If it only were like that in real life, right? I'm asking you, good that we have literature where the outcasts sort of, make liaisons and then, forge unity and unions in some cases as well. That then there's some promise of change. But, as Slavoj Žižek would say, if you're down and under, if you're the underdog, it doesn't necessarily make you the the good soul, the bearer of change. Like you can really wallow in the mud and just like not make any solidarity gesture with the underdog.
Yeah, well, I like to read about underdogs who somehow do something and just wriggle. At least they wriggle, you know. And I think of course, not all suffering poor people are good people, you know. But we can agree that they shouldn't be suffering and they shouldn't be poor, you know. And we should celebrate those of them who try to wriggle at least out of that situation, and maybe by that creating space for others to wriggle their way out of the situation, you know. So, I don't know what to say. I mean, for me, those characters are very real, you know, and I really believe that this creative outcast, this creative underdog that brings about change is a historical reality and is a historical fact. So if a group of teenagers could change Western cultural history by behaving like idiots in a place called Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich 100 years ago, you know, that's a proof. Tristan Tzara was 17, 18 years old, you know, and he just didn't give a damn about anything but creating havoc. I doubt that he realized what would happen, you know, that he realized that this would become a world movement, that Dada group would spring up everywhere. It was the same as punk, you know. This is just young people, fed up people making trouble, you know, and it works.
Let's take a little bit longer for people to get fed up then.
Sorry.
Time is ticking.
Yes,
time is ticking. No, you know, let's wait for people to get fed up with things.
Yes,
it's taking time.
It's a law. It's a law that it just happens, you know. I'm a complete optimist when it comes to the human race, you know. I don't know. It's maybe because I'm Icelandic and we always feel that things can only get better. No matter how deep the hole is, we think things can only get better. And if they get a little bit worse in between, they can only get better after that. You know. So the history is that the bad guys, they lose out, and they end up looking like idiots.
But whatever you do, don't try to save the banks, right? From an Icelandic perspective.
No. Yeah. No, I'm really a strong believer in that. And if you look at the history of let's say, the relationship between authors and authoritarian states, who are the winners in the end? Even how much the authors have to suffer under those tyrants. Who is the one who's going to survive in history? You know. Who's going to be more respected in history, Stalin or Bulgakov? Tell me. Who won in the end? Stalin is the big loser of history. Sorry. That's how it is. This is a law. That's why we should be optimistic.
Well, Sjón has seen it all, also in a song. The first promotional single from the Dancer in the Dark soundtrack, Selma Songs. It speaks of one coming to terms with the fact that they are going blind. Again, metaphors. So here's Katja again, together with Andraž and Robert, singing I've Seen It All.
Seen the trees, seen the willow leaves dancing in the breeze, seen a man killed by his best friend, and lives that were over before they were spent. I've seen what I was and I know sea. Haven't seen elephants, kings or Peru. I'm happy to say I had better to do. What about China? Have you seen the Great Wall? All wars are great if the roof doesn't fall. The man you will marry, the home you will share. To be honest, I really don't care. I've never been to Niagara Falls. I've seen water, it's water, that's all. The Eiffel Tower, the Empire State. My pulse was as high on my very first day. Brenton's hand as he plays with your hair. To be honest, I really don't care. Spark. I've seen what I choose and I see what I need, and that is enough. To want more would be greed. I've seen what I was and I know what I'll be. I've seen it all, there is no more to see. All you have seen, you can always review on your own little screen. The bright and the dark, the big and the small. Just keep in mind you need no more at all. You've seen what you were and you know what you'll be. You've seen it all, there is no more to see. You've seen what you were and you know what you'll be. You've seen it all, there is no more to see.
I prefer calling you Sjón, and I'm not going to disclose your name right now, because I always separate the author from the author, and I also believe that books are more clever than the authors. Thank God. Yeah, I mean, because there's some examples that really shouldn't be allowed to speak. Will you continue working on, it says here, the final volume of a trilogy started in 1994. How recent is this news?
I have been saying since 2001 that I am about to finish the third volume of this trilogy that started in 1994, and I wrote the second volume in 2001. And now I can sincerely say that I will finish it this year. It's taken me, What? I mean, when was 1994? That was very, very long time ago, wasn't it?
When I started high school, yeah.
Yes. So it's a trilogy that I've been working on that starts in Nazi Germany. It's a Golem story. It has its roots in Prague, and it's about a Jewish refugee who brings with him the remains of the clay from the golem to Iceland, and that the creature that he creates is the narrator of this trilogy. And like any good golem should do, this golem rebelled heavily against his creator, me, and that's why it's taken me all this time to finish the book. But now I will finish it, I promise. Yeah. But I've said it so many times that nobody believes me.
But that's the thing, that's why I'm asking, like Sjón is being performative, and when you should just continue saying you're going to finish it, wouldn't the realists like that? Like you would just,
Yes, well, I really wish it was fun to keep saying it, but it isn't. I did the mistake when I published the first volume to say in an interview, yes, this is the first book in a trilogy. And immediately everybody started waiting for the second volume, especially my publisher. So, it's become a burden, and now I will relieve myself of the burden so I can continue working on the two other novels that I have in mind, and I've done some research into already. So I just keep writing, and this third volume will see light. And I don't know why we're speaking about it. Now you possibly made me lie again about this in front of people in Ljubljana. I've lied about it in many, many countries and in many cities, and now I've also possibly lied about it in Ljubljana as well.
It's just Sjón speaking,
Yes,
you're safe legally. So will you also continue working with Björk?
It's always a possibility. We've known each other for 35 years. I just discovered that this year it's 35 years anniversary of our friendship, and we started working together, doing things together, educating each other, bringing each other up as artists in the 80s. And all our collaboration, all the songs that we've done and things, are just like a continuation of the thing that started happening in the 80s. When we sit down to write together, it's always like we return to the old surrealist laboratory. It's like, Frankenstein's laboratory is always there. You only have to go in there and clean the cobweb off and polish this thing and that, and you can create a new monster. So the laboratory is always there for us. We just go in and clean a little bit, and then we write a new song. So if she calls, I say yes. Why should I say no? She's an old friend. Well, I must admit, I always begin the conversation by saying, you should do it yourself. And then she says, well, you should also help me. So I do it. Yeah.
Well, to finish off with Björk as well, here's another song, this time volcanic beats as it was described, an ode to her native land and her best friend, while containing subtexts relating to emergency. So see, you need to write. It's all in the text. Here's Katja again with Dražen Robert singing Yoga.